newspapers. Time to have a look at these now. The newspapers here on France 24, joined by Alison Sargent, who's with me here. And so, Alison, you started with what's been our top story today, those elections in Egypt.
Right, Stuart. It's the elections with very little suspense since President Sisi is running virtually unopposed, something that's gained the election quite a bit of criticism in the international press, as we'll look in a second. But first, let's look at the Egyptian press, where you really won't see quite a lot of criticism at all. Al-Akbar headlines, "Today we elect our president," and they put the emphasis really on the huge amount of security forces that will be out surveying this vote. They also call on Egyptians to vote inside the paper. They say it's everyone's responsibility. Voter turnout really is the only thing that is uncertain in this election, which pan-Arab paper Al-Araby Al-Jadeed calls a lie on its front page. And in that picture, on its front page, we actually see one of the rare billboards from Sisi's only rival in the election. That's Mustafa Musa. Al-Araby Al-Jadeed calls him an electoral decoration. Basically, they say he's only included to make the election seem free and fair. His candidacy was put forward at the last minute, and he himself is actually a supporter of Sisi. As you can see in this cartoon I pulled out from the Egyptian cartoonist, Doa Al-Adel, that's been circulating online, that journalist there is saying to him, "Candidate number 2, what would you like to tell voters?" And he says, "Vote for candidate number 1.
Interesting look at it. A lot of international news agencies, they're really denouncing the media crackdown that there's been in Egypt before, and now that it's starting the voting as well.
Yeah, and there's been particular attention paid to the case of one journalist. This is Beltrame, who is the Egypt correspondent, or I guess former Egypt correspondent for The Times. The paper revealed over the weekend that she was actually kicked out of the country in February. She tells the whole story in an article she wrote for The Times. She was arrested at a cafe while she was doing an interview, told she could either leave the country or face a military trial, so not really a real choice. She decided to leave. She thought she might be able to go back to cover the elections, but then she learned she'd been placed on a list of undesirables with no reason given to her. She writes here, "I'm leaving behind 7 years of my life, my friends, my flat, 2 rescue cats. I am cauterizing my heart to dull the pain of losing Egypt, a country that was my home and a place that I deeply love."
Yeah, we've spoken to her here on France 24 as well, so support for Beltrame there. Now, only one man then dominating the race in Egypt. Meanwhile, in the papers here in France, well, there's just one face dominating the papers today, that, of course, of Arnaud Beltrame.
That's right. This gendarme who sacrificed his life to save a hostage on Friday in Trèbes during that attack. There's one word that we're seeing alongside his photo in the papers today. If you take a look at the Figaro that you had there, that word is hero. The paper says his sacrifice teaches us a valuable lesson in a time that's really defined by individualism. They write, "Arnaud Beltrame is someone who accepted to offer his life for another, for his country, and for each one of us." Meanwhile, all of France is mourning his death. Stuart, we read that quote in Humanité, words spoken by a man who came to pay his respects at a service that was held yesterday at a church in Trèbes for the victims of that attack. Arnaud Beltrame will be given an homage national, a national tribute, in the coming days. And France's Catholic paper La Croix writes that they hope it will really allow France to come together in the wake of this attack. They remind us that national unity is more than ever essential to fighting terrorism.
And Alison, you found as well, haven't you, that some on the right are starting to criticise the French President Emmanuel Macron for not being hard enough on terrorism, in the fight against terrorism.
Right, and the Huffington Post does point out that this is something we kind of often see after attacks, people kind of using it for their own political gains to criticize other politicians. But the paper does say that Macron is really being put to the test here after this attack. He's going to be expected to address, in particular, actually, the system of this terrorist watch list we've talked about, those people who are fiché S, as we say, as this later attacker was, and, they're fiché S, but they still managed to go forward and carry out these attacks. It's tricky for Macron, though, because many of those who are fiché S don't seem like an immediate threat to security forces until suddenly they do, decide to go forward and carry out an attack. As you can see in this cartoon on the front page of L'Opinion, they say, you can see Macron is looking at a website there that's promising to radicalize jihadists in just 3 months. So it happens fast.
Finally from Alison. Love this story. It's a story about a French waiter. Now, he says he was fired from his job because of being aggressive towards his colleagues.
Right, sir. But as you know, the good part about this story is the excuse that he gave after that. He said it's not because he's rude. It's actually just because he's French. This waiter worked at a restaurant in Vancouver, Canada, which is, in Western Canada, where there are fewer Francophones. It's not like Quebec. So perhaps that's part of the, cultural misunderstanding. He is, using the claim of cultural discrimination to fight this case in court. court. I think it's going to be interesting to see what the court decides if, French people, if being French gives you the right to be rude.
I think it's going to be interesting to see if you survive the hour, Alison, having brought that story up live on air in a building where almost everybody is French. Be careful. Alison's arguing with the papers on France 24. She'll be back a little bit later on, of course, looking at some more of the newspapers for us. Next up on the programme, we're going to be reporting on how pornography is impacting young people here in France, and what messages do they retain about relationships between men and women. That's our special report, comes up for you in focus in the next half hour. Do stay with us.